I had been planning this weekend for months, a simple camping trip by the lake on my ranch. My land, my peace, my rules. I pitched my tent right at the water's edge, set up a small campfire, and for the first time in weeks, I could finally breathe. The quiet ripples of the lake felt like therapy. But as the fire crackled and the night sky turned golden, headlights appeared out of nowhere. It was the HOA president herself, Karen. She stepped out, arms crossed, with the smug look everyone in the neighborhood knew too well. "You can't camp here," she snapped, as if she owned the place. I calmly explained, "Karen, this is my ranch. This lake belongs to me. I have every right to be here." She didn't care. Her lips curled into a grin as she pulled out her phone. "Fine. I'll let the cops deal with you." My peaceful night suddenly felt like the start of a battle I didn't ask for. Minutes later, the stillness of the night was shattered by the sharp wail of sirens. Red and blue lights danced across the rippling lake, reflecting like fire on the water's surface. My heart thudded in my chest, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I knew the HOA president, Karen, was the kind of woman who could spin a story so convincing that even the truth could sound like a lie. The gravel crunched under heavy boots as two police officers stepped out of their cruiser, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like blades. I sat still by the fire, hands resting on my knees, determined not to look guilty, though deep down my blood was already boiling. This was my land, my sanctuary, the place I had bought and worked for with my own money. Yet here I was, being treated like a criminal because Karen couldn't stand losing control. Karen didn't waste a second. She charged forward with a theatrical flourish, her finger jabbing the air toward me as if she had rehearsed this moment. "Officer, there he is!" she barked, her voice shrill with self-righteous authority. "He's trespassing on HOA property! Arrest him immediately!" Her voice echoed through the night, bouncing off the water, feeding into the drama she was so eager to create. I clenched my jaw, the heat of anger rising in my chest. Trespassing, on my own land. The audacity of this woman was beyond anything I could imagine. I stood slowly, brushing the dirt off my jeans, and met the officer's eyes. One of them, a tall man with a calm but cautious expression, stepped closer, his flashlight steady on me. "Sir, can you explain what's going on here?" His tone wasn't aggressive, just professional, but it carried the weight of authority, and I knew I had one chance to make my case clearly. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm even though every muscle in my body screamed for me to shout. "Officers, this is my ranch," I said firmly, gesturing toward the wide open stretch of land surrounding the lake. This property, it belongs to me. I've got the deed in my truck. I'm not trespassing. I'm the owner. My voice was steady, but inside I was burning with frustration. Why did I have to prove ownership of something that was rightfully mine? Why did I have to justify a peaceful camping trip to strangers because of Karen's obsession with control? Karen laughed, a sharp, condescending laugh that sliced through the night air. She folded her arms across her chest and shook her head. "Don't believe him, officers," she sneered. "This entire area falls under HOA jurisdiction. He's lying to get out of trouble. He knows the rules and he's breaking them. He doesn't belong here." Her tone was dripping with arrogance, the kind of arrogance that comes from years of bullying neighbors and getting her way. For a split second, I saw it. The flicker of doubt in the officer's eyes. Karen spoke with such confidence, such conviction, that it planted seeds of uncertainty, and that terrified me. What if, for just one moment, they chose to believe her? What if they didn't even check the documents and just escorted me off my own property in front of this smug woman who thrived on humiliation? But I refused to let that happen. I marched to my truck, pulled open the glove compartment, and carefully unfolded the stack of papers I always kept ready for situations like this. Returning to the officers, I handed over the documents, my hand steady. "Here," I said. "Everything is outlined right here. Property lines, deeds, ownership records. This land doesn't fall under HOA control. It never has. The officer with the flashlight took the papers, his brow furrowing as he examined the details. His light skimmed across the maps and signatures, tracing the clear borders that proved the truth. His partner leaned over his shoulder, and together, they pieced it together silently. Finally, the officer looked up at me, his expression shifting from skepticism to understanding. The air grew still again, except for the crackling of my campfire. And then, it happened. The twist I never expected. The officer squinted at one particular line on the paperwork and then back at me. His voice dropped slightly, more curious than accusatory. "Sir," he asked carefully, "is it true you're with the FBR?" I nodded slowly, meeting his gaze. A quiet wave of recognition passed between us. I didn't need to say much more. He knew what that meant. I wasn't just some homeowner. I wasn't just another neighbor fed up with HOA nonsense. I was an agent with the Federal Bureau of Revenue, and the weight of that fact changed everything. Karen's face was a portrait of horror. The smug smile that had been plastered across her face all night dissolved instantly. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Finally, she stammered, her voice cracking under the weight of panic. "Wait, FBR? As in Federal Bureau of Revenue?" Her tone was unsteady, almost childlike now, stripped of the power she had tried to wield. For the first time since I bought the ranch, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, was completely speechless. She wasn't the one in charge anymore. The spotlight she had so desperately sought was now exposing her own arrogance, her own overreach. And in that moment, with the officer standing beside me and the truth laid bare, she finally realized, this time, she had picked a fight with the wrong man. The mood shifted instantly. A moment ago, Karen stood tall, her finger wagging, her voice booming with false authority. But when the officer's tone hardened, the ground beneath her seemed to crumble. "Ma'am," the taller officer said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of command. "You can't accuse someone of trespassing on property that isn't yours, and interfering with a federal officer, that's a serious matter." His flashlight beam moved from Karen to her little entourage of HOA board members, each of them looking suddenly smaller than they had a minute ago. The once proud squad of rule enforcers now shifted nervously on their feet, their smugness draining away as the reality of the situation sank in. Karen's mouth opened, but the words came out, uneven, broken, as if she couldn't quite find her footing. I didn't know. I thought this was HOA land. I was just trying to enforce the rules." Her voice cracked, thin and shaky, so unlike the confident tone she had wielded when she first called the cops. It was almost pitiful. Almost. But to me it was infuriating. I had watched this woman and her board harass neighbors for years. I'd seen them fine families for leaving holiday decorations up a day too long, for letting their kids chalk the sidewalk, for parking too close to the curb. She always claimed it was the rules, but deep down, it was about control. And now, here she was, shrinking before the officers, trying to play innocent, when the truth was crystal clear. The shorter officer stepped forward, his voice low but edged with warning. "Mrs. Karen, do you realize filing a false police report is not only irresponsible, it's a crime? You wasted our time, harassed this man on his own property, and attempted to manipulate law enforcement. If you continue down this path, the consequences will be very real." Karen's eyes darted around, her hands wringing together nervously. For the first time, I saw fear in her face. The kind of fear that comes when someone realizes their power has limits. Her board members, usually her echo chamber, stood behind her whispering frantically, their confidence evaporating. One man tugged at her sleeve as if urging her to stop talking before things got worse, but the officers weren't done. "We suggest you leave," the taller one said sharply. "Now, take your board with you, and think carefully before you ever try." Something like this again. With that, the group began to retreat, their footsteps crunching over the gravel as they shuffled back to their vehicle. Karen, who had marched in like a conquering queen, now looked like a scolded child. Her back was hunched, her voice hushed as she muttered to her board members. Every step she took away from the lake was a reminder that her reign of intimidation had cracked. I stood there, my fists unclenching slowly, the adrenaline draining from my body. Relief washed over me, but alongside it came a surge of anger I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about one night of camping, one false accusation, one humiliating scene. This was about years of unchecked harassment. How many families had been through similar moments? How many had paid fines they didn't deserve? How many had been too afraid to stand up, too beaten down to challenge the HOA's so-called authority? The lake shimmered quietly behind me, as if nothing had happened, but my mind was spinning. I remembered stories neighbors had shared in hushed tones, about Karen threatening them with legal action over minor landscaping choices, about families forced to repaint their homes because the shade of beige wasn't community approved. I remembered the young couple down the street who had been fined for putting up a small playhouse for their daughter in the backyard. They had eventually torn it down, defeated, because they couldn't handle the pressure anymore. And now here, she was trying to throw the same weight at me, only this time she had picked the wrong battle. She didn't just try to bully a homeowner, she tried to accuse a federal agent of a crime on his own land. And she didn't just fail, she got exposed. As her SUV pulled out of the gravel path and disappeared into the night, I let out a long breath, staring at the embers of my campfire. The silence returned, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the shore. But it wasn't the same silence I had felt before. This one was heavy, loaded with the knowledge that something bigger had been set into motion. Because in that moment I realized this wasn't the end of the fight. It was the beginning. If Karen could do this to me, she could do it to anyone. And if the HOA could stretch its power this far, how many others were suffering silently under the same abuse? No, this wasn't just about protecting my right to camp by my lake. It was about standing up for every neighbor who had been pushed around, fined unfairly, and silenced by people who thought rules gave them absolute power. That night, as the stars glimmered above and the last flames of my campfire died down, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this go. Karen thought she could scare me off, but she had just awakened a fight she never expected. The HOA had bullied the wrong man, and this time the community would know the truth. The day of the court hearing arrived, and the weight of it pressed on me the moment I stepped into the courthouse. The walls echoed with hushed voices, the shuffle of papers, and the faint smell of polished wood. It was nothing like the peaceful mornings I was used to at my ranch lake. This place had its own energy, tense, watchful, unforgiving. I clutched the folder of documents in my hand, every page carefully prepared, every signature proof of what I had worked for. This wasn't just a fight for my rights anymore. It was a battle against years of intimidation by an HOA that had gone unchecked. Karen sat across the aisle, her posture stiff, her lips pursed in that familiar scowl. Flanked by two HOA board members, she looked like she was preparing for war. She kept whispering to them, shuffling her own stack of papers, trying to project confidence, but I could see the cracks. Her eyes darted nervously around the courtroom, and the bravado she had the night she called the cops seemed much thinner under the bright lights of justice. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The room fell into silence, the kind of silence that makes you aware of every breath you take. "Be seated," the judge commanded, his voice steady and stern. And just like that, the battle began. Karen's attorney, yes, she had actually hired one, rose first. He launched into a speech about community values and maintaining the integrity of the HOA. He painted Karen as a dedicated leader who was simply trying to keep order to prevent unauthorized activity on land that appeared to fall under the association's control. He emphasized words like order and rules, hoping to sway the judge by painting me as some reckless homeowner undermining the community. I sat there, my jaw tight, listening to the half-truths and exaggerations. It was the same tactic Karen always used: bully with authority, twist the rules, and make herself sound like the victim. For a moment, I could feel the courtroom leaning toward her narrative. She was good at this. She always had been. But then it was my turn. I stood, folder in hand, and walked to the front. My voice was calm, but each word carried the frustration of years, not just mine, but of every neighbor who had suffered under HOA nonsense. "Your Honor," I began, holding up the deed. "This isn't about community rules. This is about truth. This land, every inch of this ranch, including the lake, belongs to me. It does not, and never has, fallen under the HOA's jurisdiction. I have the legal documents to prove it." I handed the judge the papers, watching him examine each page carefully. Then I added, "This is more than just an HOA misunderstanding. This was harassment. I was camping on my own property when Mrs. Karen called the police, falsely accusing me of trespassing. She wasted law enforcement's time. She tried to paint me as a criminal, and worst of all, she did it without checking a single fact." The judge raised his brow, then looked directly at Karen. "Is this true, Mrs. Karen? Did you accuse this man of trespassing without proof that the property belonged to the HOA?" Karen shifted in her seat, her voice suddenly shaky. I believed it was HOA land. I was only trying to enforce the rules. I didn't know." That was my moment. I took a deep breath and delivered the line that sealed the courtroom. "Your Honor, there's something else you should know. I'm an agent with the Federal Bureau of Revenue. When Mrs. Karen accused me, she wasn't just harassing a homeowner, she was interfering with a federal officer on his own property." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The HOA board members glanced at each other in shock, whispering furiously. Karen's face went pale, her lips trembling as she tried to compose herself. For once, she had no witty comeback, no confident speech. The judge leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "Mrs. Karen, interfering with a federal officer and filing false claims is not a trivial matter. This court takes such actions very seriously. Your complaint against the defendant is not only dismissed, it borders on abuse of authority. If this behavior continues, you and your HOA may face legal consequences far beyond this courtroom." The silence that followed was thunderous. Karen lowered her head, her arrogance shattered. The board members beside her stared at the floor, avoiding the judge's piercing gaze. As for me, I stood taller than I had in years. Not because I wanted to humiliate Karen, but because finally, justice had cut through the noise. The HOA's bullying, the intimidation, the endless abuse of power, it had all been dragged into the light for everyone to see. When the gavel came down, the case was over. The complaint was dismissed. The judge had spoken. And for the first time, Karen didn't walk out of a room with her head high. She shuffled out, defeated, whispering furiously to her board members, her reputation crumbling with each step. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt the sun on my face like a victory flag. Neighbors who had come to watch patted me on the back, their smiles wide, their eyes shining with relief. One man leaned over and whispered, "You didn't just win for yourself, you won for all of us." And he was right. This wasn't just my story. It was every homeowner's story. Every family fined unfairly, every neighbor harassed, every voice silenced. Today, we proved that even the most powerful HOA leader could be held accountable. And that truth, that justice, was a victory worth far more than just one court case. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders like I had been carrying a heavy pack for years and finally set it down. The sun outside seemed brighter, the air fresher, Even the sound of traffic felt lighter. But what struck me most wasn't just the victory. It was the realization that something had changed in the community. For the first time, the mighty HOA had been forced to face consequences. Their power wasn't untouchable anymore. In the days that followed, I started noticing a difference everywhere I went. At the grocery store, an older woman I had barely spoken to before stopped me near the produce aisle. She touched my arm gently and said, "Thank you. You don't know what this means for us." At the post office, a young father with his toddler in his arms leaned over and whispered, "You showed us we don't always have to bow down to their nonsense." Even while I was jogging one evening, a couple walking their dog clapped as I passed, grinning as if I had just scored a goal for the whole neighborhood. And they were right. This wasn't just about me and my lake. It was about every family fined for the wrong paint color on their house, every grandmother scolded for planting roses instead of HOA-approved shrubs, every kid told they couldn't chalk hopscotch on the sidewalk because it ruined the community aesthetic. It was about the endless letters, the ridiculous fees, the threats that hung over people's heads like storm clouds. The truth is, most people don't fight back, not because they agree with the HOA, but because they feel powerless. They think, "What can I do? They make the rules, and I have no choice but to follow them." I thought the same way once. But that night by the lake, when Karen tried to strip me of something I owned and loved, I realized that the only power she had was the power people gave her. And when I stood my ground, the whole facade came crashing down. What I did in court wasn't extraordinary. I simply told the truth and backed it with evidence. But to the people around me, it was a spark. It showed them that standing up, even against something as intimidating as an HOA, was possible. And that spark grew. Conversations began happening at coffee shops, at mailboxes, at playgrounds. People started asking, "Why are we letting a handful of board members run our lives? Why are we letting them bully us?" This story, my story, is just one example of what happens when ordinary people decide enough is enough. And if you're listening right now, maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've gotten that threatening letter in your mailbox. Maybe you've felt that pit in your stomach after being fined for something that made no sense. Maybe you've been afraid to speak up. But remember this, you have rights. Property you worked for, money you earned, a home you built. It belongs to you, not to some overreaching HOA that thrives on control. All it takes sometimes is one person standing their ground to remind everyone else that bullies only win when we let them. So the next time someone like Karen tries to push you around, don't forget this story. Don't forget that a single stand can change everything. Because that night at the lake, Karen thought she could humiliate me. Instead, she exposed herself. And in the end, the community found its voice.